Hello world, if you were a PC gamer back in the 2000s, I've got a question for you. Does anyone remember this? Or maybe this? I hope you don't. And even if not, I think you'll find it interesting to hear how Steam beat Microsoft, how Microsoft spent a ton of money and then lost it all. This was originally supposed to be a video about games for Windows Live, one of Microsoft's gaming services. However, I made a deep dive and found it truly fascinating behind-the-scenes story between Steam and Microsoft. It is a wild story, so let's get into it. I'll start this video from a bit further back. 2003. Valve has already created games such as Counter-Strike, Team Fortress and Day of Defeat, and in many ways these multiplayer games needed things like technical support, which included an anti-cheat system and constant updates. The problem was that after each patch, players had to wait several days for enough users to update the game. During this time, the servers remained empty. Ultimately, Valve decided to create a sort of centralized client where players could register an account, either purchase games and play them with friends without using physical copies of the games. I'm talking about compact discs, which are about to disappear soon due to lack of use, but that's another topic. So finally, Steam was released in 2003. It was a digital platform with its own and other games, with regular updates and so on, and the initial impressions were not exactly the most encouraging for the early days of the internet. Downloading games was often inconvenient, with very slow speeds, and using a disk was much simpler than what game Newell had proposed. However, people still got used to the service and found its pros and cons. You could go to Steam and find games that tens of thousands of players already loved. The launch of another legendary game, Half-Life 2, was perhaps the starting point for Steam's popularity. To say it blew people's minds would be an understatement. To attract players to the new servers, Steam was already built into the game. More specifically, when players purchased a digital disc of Half-Life 2, Steam was already packaged and loaded onto their PC. A start had been made, although essentially was not 100% effective. While many players preferred to download cracked versions of the game, for example, via torrent. So while some people loved Steam, a huge chunk of the user base practically hated, mostly because having internet at home was still kind of a luxury back then. But as the platform and internet speeds improved, Steam evolved into way more than just a clunky game installer. Alongside Valve's own titles, we started bringing in third-party developers and publishers. By 2005, there were around 150 games on the store, which honestly was not too shabby. Some of those titles included Darwinia and Ragdoll Kung Fu, though if I'm being honest with you, I've only actually played the first one. Fast forward to 2007 and Microsoft is making a serious play for the PC gaming market. But before we dive in games for Windows Live, let's look at how we got here. In the early 2000s, the big names in gaming did really see the PC as the main event, especially in the USA and Western Europe, where consoles were king. The market used to be all about Nintendo, but then came the PlayStation and later the PS2, which totally revolutionized digital entertainment. Microsoft didn't want to sit on the bench, so they launched the very first console, the Xbox, in 2001. It might have been a money-losing project at first, but it told them everything they needed to know. Then in 2005, they dropped the Xbox 360, officially kicking off the reign over the console market. The launch of the Xbox 360 was a great event for Microsoft and a shameful page in the history of Sony. The key advantage of this console was the updated Xbox Live servers, which demonstrated the power of the unified and closed ecosystem. Xbox Live provided fast patch delivery, stable online multiplayer, unified friend list and achievement system. Voice chats and game lobbies also exist using GameSpy's development, as I mentioned earlier. I've already made a video about it, so check it out if you're interested. Over time, Gabe tags, avatars and the ability to create personal rooms. All that jazz came along. Generally, it was an incredible platform with tons of features, and I honestly don't know why Microsoft later abandoned all these developments. Speaking of games, quite a few exclusives appeared for the Xbox 360. It was a rather productive time for the development of unique gaming projects, and such amazing games as Gears of War were released during these years. And it was an Xbox exclusive, and so PC players couldn't afford it. And well, by 2007, Microsoft had two massive platforms going at the same time. They got their own operating system and a booming console market. If you bought an Xbox, Microsoft got a cut. If you bought a PC, Microsoft got a cut again. Assuming you actually paid for the licensed copy of Windows, unless you were a super programmer who could create a Windows gangster version. Whatever. It was definitely precisely this year that Windows Vista was released. And hell, the only thing worse than that was Windows ME, I think. So what seems to be a problem? First off, is the quality of Windows Vista itself. I want to remind you that the main feature of this operating system was the error interface, you know, those translucent glassy windows you might remember. And the problem was that, in large part because of this new feature, the PC was running very slowly. That new look was so heavy it made PCs run like absolutely garbage. Secondly, DirectX 10 was included exclusively for Vista. Some games either required Vista to run, Halo 2 for example, and it's despite the fact the original game being released on the original Xbox. Other games like Crysis just offered better graphics if you were on Vista, which later affected other games with DirectX 10 support, such as BioShock and Gears of War. In practice, the visual difference between DirectX 10 and DirectX 9 was barely noticeable. Honestly, it often looked exactly the same because the implementation was just so poorly optimized. This move really ticked players off, and to them, it just felt like an arbitrary cap rather than a real technical benefit. And the cherry on the top, along with the release of Vista, Games for Windows Live was released, and this was not just a game launcher, it was a Microsoft's very own project designed to secure a foothold in the PC gaming market. Back in 2006, Bill Gates unveiled the Live Anywhere concept, a kinda ecosystem that would unite PCs, consoles and phones with Java support.
Hello, I'm Bill Gates.
And Games for Windows Live was intended to become a primary tool for managing gaming services. And it was on Windows Vista that this very tool was released. That is, exclusively for Vista, and it was not supported on Windows XP. So the first game supported by Games for Windows Live appeared, which were the PC port of Halo 2 and Shadowrun. Originally it was a cyberpunk role-playing game, but in 2007 Microsoft bought the rights to the franchise and then released the shooter game based on it. And well, I don't want to talk about what kind of games it was. It's important for me to talk about the most important feature. In these games, PC players could battle console players in PvP multiplayer. To put it briefly, this was the cross-play system we know today. It could be said to have been the beginning of the very revolution in gaming, and this is where I want to describe the first problem. Xbox had an Xbox Live Gold subscription, which allowed for multiplayer, and it had several subscription levels. Microsoft, to make more money from these new servers, came up with the idea of introducing game subscriptions for PC players as well, allowing players to play with other players. Simply put, PC players had to pay subscription to play multiplayer against each other. It's crazy, isn't it? So what do we have? We have Windows Vista, the operating system all users hated, which kept on Windows XP despite the exclusive DirectX 10. Microsoft even released games for Windows Live for paid multiplayer against other players. Also, we have Games on Demand was released, an online store for purchasing games. All that stuff against the Steam. To be fair, Steam was not such a huge platform back in 2007. Back then, some good classic games were already being released on the Source engine, like Team Fortress 2 and Portal. By 2007, Steam had already released about 100 games from other developers, including various titles from Total War and Trackmania. The first Call of Duty games were also there, but frankly, Steam didn't really stand out that much. Steam was more of a local space, so to speak. Microsoft in turn stood out with good titles as a response. GTA 4 was already on its way out and the gaming press was buzzing about it. As a result, it was released exclusively for purchasing games on demand and downloadable directly through the Games for Windows Live client. Dark Souls, a console exclusive as well, gave PC players the chance to experience the game only using the Games of Windows Live client. As I understand it, it was released at the time under the Prepare to Die edition, correct me if I'm wrong, and PC players could try this truly legendary game only on this client. Resident Evil 5, which was released late in 2009 on consoles, also allowed you to try this on a PC, but again using the client from Microsoft, and this affected a huge number of games which were primarily played by console players on the Xbox 360. This includes many games like Fallout, BioShock, Fable, Flatout, and many others. And only later, all these games will refuse this service due to some problems with this Microsoft project, and some games could not be played normally at all afterwards, but more on that later. Meanwhile, Steam has been developing by leaps and bounds. Over the past 5 years, quite a few things have appeared here that we can't even imagine the service without. We've already got friend lists, chats and groups, Steam Greenlight. Maybe anyone remembers it. We've also got a mobile app that lets you make purchase from the store for thousands of games. And we've also got a marketplace where you can trade various in-game items with other players from all over the world. Well, the ones stored in your inventory. And all of this resonated with PC gamers, knowing the disappointment they would face if they ever had to launch games from Windows Live again. People quickly found Steam as a convenient service they like. And perhaps Microsoft wanted to destroy Steam and be a monopolist in this environment, but they definitely didn't succeed in that. This feature found no traction among Windows users because there was not such a great need for it. Most of users were still using Windows 7, which had been released a little earlier, but later, Microsoft made a somewhat strange move after the failure. In 2012, Windows 8 came out. The main feature of Windows 8, however, was apps created specifically for this operating system. It was about monopolizing the entire PC market. Microsoft, to put it briefly, wanted to capture the entire app market, including games. And through such a monopolization, Microsoft, among other things, could have used a slightly different format, like a console format. I mean, all apps would have been verified by Microsoft. So many apps and games were tested, and most of the games were at risk of being cancelled. Steam, for example, might not have passed this verification on Windows 8. The Windows Store, which is where many apps would have been stored for download. And besides this terrible interface, in my opinion, there were no ratings, no comment section, no discussions, none of the things that made many players fall in love with Steam. And the irony of the situation is that with the release of Windows 8, Microsoft almost completely repeated the same mistakes as with the release of Windows Vista, with forcing users to have unnecessary apps and services. Players were outraged by the attempt to transform the open platform into something between a tablet and a console, as well as by the interface experiments. Where's the bloody Windows icon? In response to the wave of negativity, Microsoft got a fix in Windows 8.1 in 2013. The start menu was reinstalled in a stripped down form, and the transition to Metro UI was made less intrusive. So where's the Gabe Newell and his gang, and they decided to have Linux support for Steam, apparently analyzing and understanding where all this is going in Windows. SteamOS was also announced and developed in 2013. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it didn't go back then, as many other games were supported on Windows, while SteamOS machine only supported Valve games and a few other titles from other developers. But anyway, while Steam machines ultimately failed to gain some popularity, the very existence of SteamOS forced Microsoft to change the strategy. It wasn't until the release of Windows 10 that things changed for the better, but became an optional app for finding things to install on your PC. Later, Microsoft even integrated Steam into its own Xbox platform. So what's the bottom line? Steam is the dominant PC app today, will continue to be. Also, it has evolved into the fully fledged ecosystem with a good amount of features including achievements, friends, chats, Steam Cloud, and a Steam Workshop. In 2022, Steam Deck was released, earning incredible respect among the gaming community, and Steam can afford to experience with features like Steam Machine or Steam Controller, for example, and all of that thanks to the failure of Microsoft. And this failure by Microsoft is evident even from their very first steps if we're talking about operating system design, as was the case with Windows Vista. While creating a very slow operating system, they still managed to urge people to use it because it was supported DirectX 10, or because multiplayer support was only available, but yes, you have to pay for this. And looking back on all this time, it's truly laudable and funny to see. Meanwhile, Gabe Newell quietly created a user-friendly app available in the entire world, offering a store with over 10,000 games without any restrictions. Gabe created the ability for developers to upload their games directly to Steam so people could try them out, not just on PCs but also on Steam consoles. Steam became the gold standard for gaming. And one more question, what if Gabe hadn't done all this? Well, at the very least, people would have paid to play multiplayer. And that's no exaggeration. Microsoft would have only put proven games on its Windows Store, largely denying developers the freedom to create. And without Steam, it might not have been possible to play all of this with the comfort we do now. As a result, Microsoft tried to corner the PC market and spent a ton of dollars on it. It all went down the drain. So what happened to all these Microsoft services I was talking about? Games on Demand, a service that offered a marketplace for purchasing games, was initially renamed Games for Windows Marketplace, and when the site was shut down completely, the service and its content itself were merged with the Xbox website, which later evolved into the Windows Store, which became a little better, but it still remains the same service with a limited number of games. Games for Windows Live. The service was with great potential, but it ended up being a massive flop because it was just riddled with issues. Tons of games literally broke because the service kept glitching out.
Okay. Good timing there, Live. Good time.
It was always running in the background, eating up your RAM and forcing you to log in just to play a single player game. And the lag, the crashes, don't even get me started on the infinite update loops. It would say update required, but you had to be online to get the update, and you couldn't get online without the update. And since the service was basically dead, you literally couldn't even launch the games you bought and activated through it. I myself remember trying to boot up Fable 3 like a decade ago, only to get hit with this annoying error saying GFWL refused to connect to the live service. No idea if it's still a mess today, but I think I finally fixed it. It was basically a complete massacre. So by 2015, Microsoft gave up and killed it off. They stripped almost every game from their store and moved to Steam. Thank you for watching this short story of Steam's victory over Microsoft. I hope I was able to cover this topic and you really enjoyed it. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section, and well, that's all for now. See you later when we take a next step forward to the past.